can talk about, I don't know if you guys know much about that, but it's a really bad system that we've created. We have our oil system that nobody really needs to question whether or not it's a good or bad system. We know it's not working. We know there's a lot of really harmful effects. And then we have our coal system. And in the U.S., we have all these mountains, these Appalachian Mountains, and we remove the top of the mountains to get coal, to have these coal-burning power plants. You can press the next slide. So this is kind of how we get our coal in the U.S., is that we go to these areas, and people in Appalachia are known for being poor. It's very small, poor, rural communities. We blow up these mountaintops so we can get coal. There is a crazy amount of environmental impacts that happen. A lot of these people in this area have really high rates of cancer. They have really high rates of asthma. There's literally just smog everywhere in these areas. We then take that coal, and we put this, you guys were saying 18th Street. There's these two coal plants that used to be in Pilsen and Little Village. You take that coal and then you burn it in a very poor neighborhood. And all of that smog, if you look at the rates of asthma and other things in Pilsen and the health effects, significantly worse than other parts of the city. And it's because we had these coal plants. And then that's at the local, the national, and then you look at the global, we've had a lot of really terrible things that have been happening in the past 10 years, and they're just going to get worse because of climate change. But this system to us seems okay because we're just valuing the economics of it. Economically, we make money on all three of these, so it seems fine. But if you look at it closer, it's clearly a harmful system in every single step of the way. You can continue. Now food, I'll try not to get very overwhelmed by this. Food is my #1 topic, and I spend a lot of my time on food. But we talked about the local, we have food deserts, not everyone has equal access to food. Poor communities have less access to good food, and when you have less access to good food, it's like your #1 indicator for whether or not you're going to be a healthy person is what you're eating. And so when you live in a poor area and you don't have access to food, how are you supposed to be a healthy individual? We talked about very briefly about Monsanto last time when we watched that video. When we talk about pesticides and herbicides and everything on your food that go into your body and create cancers in your body, like that again, the organic food is a lot more expensive, and it's something that we charge higher for, and then the people who can buy cheaper foods are going to be eating pesticides and genetically modified crops. When you talk about at the national level, there's a whole movement trying to remove family farmers from their lands right now. Not only in the U.S., but all around the globe, in Canada, in, I'm sure, France, in India, in Africa. And it's basically these big multinational corporations whose bottom line is always money, who come try to get the land, and they kick these family farmers off, and they use that land for one very specific way of doing farming. That includes the pesticides and the herbicides and terrible things. We have chronic disease, heart disease, cancer, obesity, and diabetes. These are all chronic diseases related to food. All of them are. And we don't tend to look at food. We tend to look at what is it that we can take as pills in order to be okay with the fact that we have heart disease, cancer, obesity, or diabetes. And that's not the answer. The answer is food. We have contamination in waterways because of the pesticides, and we have loss of biodiversity. Globally, we can't even start talking about it, but basically the U.S. government pays so much for corn. They give farmers, big farmers in Monsanto, subsidies for corn so that we undercut every other market in the world. There are markets in Africa, there are markets anywhere that cannot compete with U.S. corn because our government subsidizes it for us. Again, this is all based on just the economic lens. And we talked last week about how over 250,000 farmers in India have committed suicide. It's because of this system. And so when we talk about is this system just, clearly there's a lot of problems with it. You can go to the next slide. So this is a little bit about, I talked at the beginning about how you cannot take yourself out of nature because you are part of your environment, and there's an intrinsic connection between human and earth. Does somebody want to read this for me? Somebody with a loud voice? Go ahead.
Global warming and environmental degradation are human rights issues. Differences in wealth, location, and power subject some people more than others to the deleterious effects of a suffering environment. By no stretch of the imagination can one say that we are all equally affected by climate change, or surface mining, or acid rain, or desertification, or water poisoning by power production. For some, these effects are inescapable. They are just unjust, and those of us who benefit from the destruction of their environments must take responsibility.
So when we talk about the butt-kicking aspect, that's to quote James, of this neighborhood behind us, that's what we're talking about, is a lot of people in this system who benefit from the system are directly impacting the people who are not benefiting by the system, who are being destructed by the system. And it's not that we all here in this room benefit from the system, and it's not that we don't have love and care and compassion for other people who are harmed by it, but we are all part of the same system, and it is easier for us to not have to think about these things and just to go about our day-to-day than it is to see all the systems that are in play and how they really create oppressive systems. You can go to the next slide. And so this is this talk that Terry and I were giving were to a bunch of people who were doing community organizing and social justice work in Oklahoma. And so we kind of looked at all of these issues that I've talked about: energy, coal, mountaintop removal, Pilsen, all of these things. And I had this sort of symbol of these things because a lot of times people who are working at all of these levels, they tend to work alone. I have a lot of friends who work on immigrant rights issues. They don't necessarily talk to the people who work on food issues. They don't necessarily talk to the people who work on energy issues. And so the point I was trying to make in this slide and the next one is that if they all came together to work on one issue, we could probably deal with the marketplace dominance. Right now, that economic lens that I keep talking about and that marketplace dominance, we can't combat it individually, or we can't combat it just working in our silos, that we have to come together for social justice, for environmental justice, criminal justice, any type of work you can think of, come together, and that's the only place that we can combat marketplace dominance and make it so we're looking at the world through more than just an economic lens, but through a social lens and a cultural lens as well. And I think, Terry, you're probably up. And within this context, Terry's going to spend some time talking about our Accelerate 77 project.
Okay. Before we do, why don't we just talk a little bit about what Seva just told us. What was one point that Seva was making in this talk? And she made lots and lots of points. But what's one that you remember? Yes?
That the economy is directing our world.
Okay, so one is that the economic has become the dominant. It's become the strong way that we look at the entire social process. All right? Yes?
You have more chance to be unhealthy when you live in poor neighborhoods?
You have less chances for food?
No, more chance to be unhealthy?
More chance to be,
Unhealthy.
you're going to be sick.
Yeah.
More chances for being unhealthy if you're living in a poor neighborhood than if you're in a rich or well-to-do neighborhood. All right? What's another point that you heard her make?
They give subsidies to farmers for the corn, so that other countries can compete with them.
So we're competing with, anyway, just say it again for me.
They give subsidies to farmers, so that the farmers for other countries or the farmers can.
So it's a subsidy. They give things to farmers to do things in certain ways, and then they can make money, and then that's the way we do food. All right? How about somebody at the back table? What was one point that you remember from Seva's talk?
I remember that people today care about their future and they try to find the best way to get the better return on investment for their career.
It was her example, especially about education, wasn't it? That we go to the university, we go to get an education, and the only lens, the only way we look at it, tends to be with, well, how much money can we make? Rather than about many other different things. All right. Did anyone else? I think we've had someone from every table talk. But what other points do you remember Seva making in this presentation? Yes.
Well, the social problem is treated at the same time with equality. It's strongest that the economical